Let's get started in this, our exciting study of accounting, which is really the language of business. Now let me ask you, how many of you have ever thought that you might want to start and run your very own business? I mean, you'd be your own boss, maybe take an idea that you've had and really make it happen. Plus, maybe there'd be opportunities to make some really big money. Most everybody at some point in time in their life has thought about actually starting their own business. But what really is a business? Simply defined, a business is an organization which seeks to provide goods or services to customers. We can really create three categories or three basic kinds of businesses. First, there's a manufacturing business, a business that actually takes some raw materials or components and builds something that you can touch or feel, some kind of a product. For example, General Motors takes steel and various other component parts and manufactures automobiles. General Mills is a cereal maker primarily. Their most popular products are Wheaties and Cheerios. Now, General Mills makes Wheaties and Cheerios for customers, but they don't actually sell these cereals to us, the consumer, directly. They actually do that primarily through some kind of a merchandiser or distribution kind of a business. For example, a large grocery retail chain will buy Cheerios from General Mills and sell those directly to the end user or consumer, to us. This kind of a business, that grocery store chain, is referred to as a merchandising or distribution business. And because they're involved in the sale of a product directly to us, the end user or customer, they're referred to as a retail merchandising or distribution business. Now, we all recognize these kinds of businesses. If you go to the local mall or shopping center, you'll see stores and shops which are in the business of merchandising or distributing or selling products directly to consumers. One of the great success stories in a merchandising business is Walmart. The founder of Walmart, Sam Walton, his great idea was how to better distribute products, especially to smaller towns and locations. He thought, hey, even in smaller towns, there's a need and a way that we could efficiently and effectively distribute products that maybe they could only get in larger communities. And so he started this chain of stores that has been unbelievably successful. His great idea wasn't some product. It was a way to actually distribute the product. There are also wholesale merchandisers or distributors, but generally speaking, we don't recognize their names. The reason why we don't is because they actually function in kind of a middle person capacity. For example, we may have some small independent grocery store chains or small grocery store, and they will not necessarily deal directly in the acquisition of their cereal products with General Mills. But instead, they'll get their boxes of Wheaties and Cheerios for their customers through some kind of a wholesaler who's actually acting as a middle person in the distribution process. The third kind of a business is a business that provides really services. They're not actually involved in manufacturing or distributing specific tangible products. They render services. For example, a hospital would probably be really more a service business. They're not really producing anything or distributing any particular products. They're actually providing services. CPA firm, engineering firms, these kinds of businesses are also not really producing something that's tangible, some product, but really render some kind of advice or service and are successful in that kind of a business. Now, there are some businesses that provide a combination of these goods or services to customers. They do a little of each. They do some manufacturing, merchandising, and provide services. For example, a restaurant might kind of fit into this combination category. For example, most restaurants, I'm guessing, actually make and prepare meals. I mean, they don't buy some prepackaged frozen meal from some manufacturer and simply are involved in defrosting it and delivering it to their customers as some kind of a merchandiser. They actually make their meals, and so to some extent you might say they manufacture meals. And then they deliver it directly to the customer. So they're actually involved in distributing that product to the customer. And then theoretically, they're providing, in many cases, some services. Now, I have to admit, I've been in some restaurants where I've really questioned whether they provide any service or not. And in fact, there are some restaurants that really don't emphasize service. They're really kind of designed really, for just, for example, some pizza takeout place may simply be providing the food and not really be too involved in the service application of that business. So, those are the three different kinds of businesses, and if you're going to start any kind of a business, you're probably going to be either a manufacturer or some kind of a distributor or merchandiser or provide some kind of a service or some combination of those. But if in fact you have some kind of an idea to start some kind of a business like these, then what would it really take? What would a person need to start a successful business? Well, think about that. I mean, what would it take? Probably first a good idea. Some good idea for a product or service that can be sold at a profit. A lot of times people get ideas and they think, boy, that's a really good idea. But what really constitutes a good idea is whether or not people, customers, would really think it's a good idea. They'd really think it's such a good idea that they'd actually even buy it, and buy it at a price that's sufficient to cover all of the costs of actually producing that product so that it can be sold at a profit. Now that would be a good idea. But in addition to a good idea, most businesses require that there be some capital. This is money or resources to actually bring that idea, that product or service, to life. For example, if in fact you thought you had a great idea for a certain kind of a restaurant, I'm going to guess that it would probably take a considerable amount of capital, money or resources to actually make that happen. You'd have to access a building and on some land, maybe you'd be able to lease it, but even that would take some capital, some kind of a down payment and commitment to make payments in the future. Plus, you're going to have tables and chairs and cooking equipment. You're actually going to have to hire employees and train them. And so I'm going to guess that in order to start a restaurant, it's going to probably take a pretty significant amount of capital, money or resources, to make that idea really come to life. Now, there are some ideas, business ideas, that maybe don't require so much capital. These tend to be more oriented towards the service businesses. In fact, you see a lot of students many times who don't have much capital kind of moving in the direction of service businesses. For example, you see a lot of students starting some kind of car washing or window washing or some kind of landscape maintenance or these kinds of services. Think about a window washing business. If you were to start a window washing business, I mean, really, what kind of capital would it take? Well, I suppose you probably need, a ladder and a squeegee and a bucket and not much more than that. So really, it doesn't take much capital in order to get the resources to make it happen. But I've had some students tell me that they've had an idea for something simple like this, but really just couldn't make it happen simply because they didn't have the time to make it happen. They were too busy studying, or they had to keep their hourly job because they had to make rent payments next week. And so to take even 2 weeks to kind of get it going and get your first customers was probably more resources, time, and effort than they really could spend. So when we talk about capital, many times it's appropriate to talk not only in terms of money or resources, but also the time and effort necessary to make it happen, especially in a service business. The final component of a successful business, I believe, is management skill. The ability to effectively employ your capital, whatever resources you have, to actually produce a product or services at a profit. Sometimes this is overlooked and can be very critical. Now, it's important to note that some businesses may be operated on a non-profit basis. For example, some hospitals really aren't interested in generating significant profits, but they still provide goods or services and require capital and management skills to operate effectively. Now, somebody said that good ideas are a dime a dozen. And in fact, that seems to be the case. I've had many students who've come to me and said, told me about ideas that they had and sounded like really good and terrific ideas for goods or services that they could provide to customers, hopefully at a profit. Good ideas are easy to come by. Maybe the most difficult thing in terms of forming a successful business, the most difficult thing might be just getting access to capital. That old saying, it takes money to make money, is really kind of true. So if in fact you were thinking about starting a business, had a great idea, and in fact you did need capital, how can someone actually gain access to that capital to start a business? Well, besides using your own money or resources, there are really only two ways to access capital. There's only two ways to do it. First, you can borrow it. You can borrow it from, some friend or from some bank. These lenders are referred to as creditors or lenders. And we refer to this, generally speaking, this borrowing of resources from lenders or creditors to capitalize a business. We refer to it as debt financing of a business. The only other option besides borrowing capital is to get it from investors who effectively become owners in the business. Owners, investors, making contributions of capital in exchange for some ownership interest in the business. This is referred to as equity financing. So there really are two ways in order to get capital or resources for a business. One is through borrowing, debt financing, or by sharing ownership, which is referred to as equity financing. I suppose if you did have your own money and you were going to put it into a business rather than get it from some other investors, what you really are doing is equity financing, because you as the owner are providing the resources to the business and therefore are the sole owner of a business rather than necessarily sharing it by bringing in additional capital from other sources. So again, my point is you either borrow resources or you get it from owners, either yourself or from other investors who then participate in ownership. When we use this term financing, the financing of a business, we're talking about how capital is actually obtained for a business. You know, when a student is in college and is majoring in business and thinking about majoring in finance, what they're really talking about is the study of how to capitalize businesses or get the resources necessary in order to start or to grow a business. And they'll be focusing on either debt financing or equity financing because those are the only two ways that capital or resources can be made available to a business.